I think we've seen some very interesting presentations, and they very much lead on to what we're presenting here today, which is about the IATA Travel Pass. As we've heard from my colleagues before, the key issues is that governments need to be able to open up their borders again without quarantine, while at the same time they need to be confident that they're not putting their citizens at risk due to COVID-19. As we've also heard, the solution to this is testing. It's been proven to be the safest and most efficient model. But more importantly, as a traveler myself, I'm perfectly willing to get tested. This is the least of all the bad options out there. So if I can get tested, if that means that I can travel, I'm more than willing to do it. However, it's not only about testing, it's also about confidence. So passengers, governments, airlines need to have confidence in the testing environment and be able to, and this comes back to the key word, which is always verifiability. Verifiability. Everybody needs to be confident in the system which is in place and make sure that the test results can be verified. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, there's 4 different players in this, and if we look at the challenges facing each of the different 4 different players, the first one is passengers. They need to be able to figure out what are the requirements for my destination and any transit points. They need to be told what vaccination they require, or what test they need, or what type of vaccination they need, when they need to get it, etc. They then also need to be able to take their test, which can be verified, and then transfer it on to governments and airlines. From an airline's perspective, they need to be able to tell their passengers in advance exactly what they need to get in order to be carried. Then they need to be able to verify that the passenger is who they say they are, so they need to verify their identity, and then they need to be able to verify that the test which the passenger has had meets the requirements for the destination. From a government's perspective, it comes back to that keyword again, confidence and verifiability. Governments need to feel confident in the results which the passengers have presented them with. And if you can look in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure we've all seen the news stories about people selling fake test results outside an airport. If that type of thing continues, governments won't have confidence, and then they won't open their borders again. So we need to make sure that we have the confidence in the system. And then finally, laboratories and test centers are a key player in this. They need to be able to transfer, they need to be able to obviously get in contact with passengers, provide them with the right testing. But even more importantly, they need to be able to provide the test results and the vaccination results in a way that airlines, governments, and passengers can verify those results. Okay, next slide, please. So that is the purpose behind the IATA Travel Pass solution. And what we're coming up with, it's a modular approach. So we have a complete solution, which we call IATA Travel Pass. And that's made up of 4 different modules. And the purpose behind that is that airlines can choose the different modules which meeting their business needs. So let's run through each one of the 4 different modules. The very first one is a registry of health requirements. And this is powered by something called Thematic. Thematic is not something new. IATA's been running Thematic now for, I believe, 60 years, originally in a book, and now it's in an automated system. What Thematic does is it provides airlines and passengers with all of the regulations in terms of passports and visas. So how long your passport needs to be valid for, if you need a visa, etc. The second thing is there's a rules engine within Thematic, which enables airlines to automatically verify that passengers meet these requirements. So when all of you have checked in for your flights, the itinerary and your passport details would have been sent to IATA. We would have processed them, and we would have said, this passenger meets the passport and visa regulations. And this is exactly what we're going to do for COVID test and vaccination. So in addition to checking whether you meet the passport and visa requirements, we'll also be able to tell automatically whether you meet the test requirements. That solution is in place. We are currently collecting the data. The airline relies upon us, obviously, for the first 2 modules for the last 50 years. But for the COVID one, it's been in place right from the beginning of the COVID epidemic. And my colleagues in Amsterdam work 24/7 with airlines with governments and airlines around the world to collect all of this information. Okay, so that's the first module. It's the registry of health requirements. The second thing is we need to have a registry of testing and vaccine centers. So we need to know which vaccination centers, test centers and vaccination centers, are authorized or are able to offer the different types of tests. This will enable our passenger to be able to figure out what test I need, which comes from Thematic, but also where in my locality can I find a testing center which will offer me that exact type of test, which will be accepted by the destination. And that's the purpose behind the registry of the testing and vaccination centers. So they get listed, and then we also can figure out, you can also check what type of test they offer. The third solution, or the third module, is Lab App. And that's something which we're developing for the laboratory industry, which will enable them to verify the passenger's identity and then share the test results with the passenger in a way where those tests can be verified. And this comes back to this keyword again, the verifiability about the tests. Okay, so the Lab App in airline enables the labs to send the test to the passenger. And the passenger then in turn can pass it on to the airlines and governments. And then the fourth module is the IATA Contactless Travel App. And that's something which we've been working on for the last couple of months. At the moment, it enables passengers to create a digital version of their passport, enables them to then receive the test results from the laboratory. It then enables them to be able to verify that those test results are sufficient for their destination. And if they get that, they can then share those test results with the governments and the airlines. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we're going to look at each one of these modules and how they relate to one another from a passenger perspective. Okay, so the first thing is, I as a passenger, I download the IATA Contactless Travel App, and then I create a digital version of my passport based on the ICAO DTC standard. So within my phone, I now have an electronic copy of my passport. So I now go to a laboratory who's got Lab App. I show them my electronic identity and prove I am who I say I am. That laboratory then generates a QR code, which I, the passenger, scan, and then that binds the Lab App together with the mobile application. And what that means is that as soon as the results are available, the Lab App can send the results to the Contactless Travel App in a way that those results could be verified. So now as a passenger, I've got two things on my phone. I have my verified passport, my digital passport, which has been verified, and I have my test results, which are being sent by the Lab App in a way which they can also be verified. So I now need to look and figure out, is this test result sufficient for my journey? And next slide, please. At that point, the app can send both the test results and my itinerary into Thematic Audit Check. Thematic Audit Check processes that and then says yes or no. If they have a yes, so basically if the passenger meets all of the immigration requirements, a message is sent back to the passenger's phone with an OK to travel status. So now on my phone, I've got three things. I've got my identity, I've got my test results, and I've got an OK to travel status. And that's a little bit similar to what the last question was about in the previous session, which the Chinese government were talking about. It's a very similar concept. I've got the test results, and they're good for my destination. So at that point, I can then share these with various different partners along the way. Next slide. I can do this in three different ways, or rather 2 ways, 2.5 ways. The first one is if the airline or border control can receive verifiable credentials, and all that is it means that I can send it to them electronically. If they can receive all of this electronically, I can basically click on a share button on my screen, and it'll be shared with the airline or border control. If the airline or border control can't receive these electronic credentials, instead, we're going to be able to, or the passenger can display the OK to travel on their screen. Okay, that will have the OK to travel. It'll also have the itinerary, and then it will also have the test details down below. So therefore, if the agent wants to look at them in more detail, they can do. And finally, at the bottom of that screen, there'll be a QR code. And that airline or border control, if they have a compatible application, can screen that QR code, and it will pop, or they'll be able to access the certificate to say this is a genuine OK to board status. So there it comes back to that word verifiability again. Okay, next slide. So if you look at this, this is how each of the different modules comes together. You've got the lab app for sending the for creating and sending the credentials. You've got the contactless travel, which is bringing everything together and making sure they're sufficient using automatic auto check. And then you have the ability to share them with airlines and governments. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what's really important about all of this, and even before we went with IATA or with the COVID module, and we had the IATA contactless travel application. It's been developed, and our motto in developing it was protecting passengers and protecting passengers' data. As such, we've developed it using decentralized technologies. What this means is the passenger is in complete control of their own data. They're the ones who get presented with on the screen with a message saying, do you want to share your data with this government? These are the data elements we're going to send. This is what it's going to be used for, and this is that government's data policy. The passenger is the one who then clicks on share, and then the data is sent from the passenger's phone directly to the airline or government. So there's no central system, there's no central database. It's creating a relationship between me, the passenger, and the airline and the government. By doing this, it puts passengers in complete control of their own data. Okay. As part of that, they can then they can then see who they've shared their data with. They can also delete their data as well. Needless to say, we will adhere to all GDPR compliance issues around the world. In actual fact, with this decentralized approach, we actually go further than is required by most GDPR regulations. Next slide, please. Okay. When we developed this, there was 3 different key principles. The very first one is that we wanted to make it modular and interoperable with other COVID-19 solutions and other existing airline and industry solutions. By this we mean airlines can choose to adopt the entire ecosystem and all 4 modules. However, airlines can also choose to go with other players in the market and say, you know what, we only need one particular module. For example, we just need to be able to figure out what are the registered labs out there which can offer the test in certain markets. Okay. A second part of this is we've based it on open standards. So ICAO DTC, which is the digital version of a passport, that's an ICAO standard which we are adhering to. Similarly, in terms of verifiable credentials, we're adopting the W3C digital comms. And then finally, we're adopting the One ID initiative, which many of you may know is all about the creation of the digital travel credential and then passing it on to airlines and airports. So these are some of the standards we're adhering to today. But what we're also saying is, for some of the new modules, there isn't standards today. So what we're going to do there is we're going to develop them and we are going to publish the interfaces. And what we're saying to the industry is that any other players in the market can also adopt these interfaces, with the idea being that laboratories just need to develop one interface. Governments need to develop one interface. Airlines need to develop one interface. And if they do that, then they'll be able to communicate with all of the different solutions out there in the market. And obviously, the whole principle behind this is that we want to develop a solution for everyone. We need to get passengers back flying again, and that's really what's driving us with these solutions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's look at some of these. Let's not go through all of the different points, but there's a couple of ones which really jump out. The first one is that based on proven solutions. So we already have automatic auto check. Last year, I think we processed about 800 million passengers using that passport and visa module. So this is something we have already. We have the relationships with the governments and with the health authorities around the world. Similarly, on IATA contactless travel, it was developed for the transfer of digital passport, but it can also be used, but we're just expanding it now to also include health credentials. The third thing is it's modular, so airlines could choose exactly the modules they require, which supports their strategy. Trust framework. I think it's fair to say that IATA is trusted. We have credibility in this area. We're a trusted player. We work with governments. We work with airlines. If we come up with this, governments are much more likely to adopt it and to accept it and adopt it. It's interoperable based on open standards and open networks. And then finally, this is really critical, it's also sustainable. So let's say in 6 months down the road, or please willing, we've solved, or please willing, COVID is behind us in 6 months or a year's time. But what happens if something new comes down the road? The whole premise behind this, as you can see, is that we can expand it and we can cater to new developing requirements in the future. And that's something which the industry is definitely going to need. Okay, next slide, please. So if we look at the timelines, we are planning on piloting this, or we're in the process of finalizing a pilot for this at the end of the year with IATA. Then in Q1 of next year, we will launch a new version of the contactless travel app, which will include, which we'll be launching it on. So everything we've talked about here today will be in that version in Q1 2020 based on Apple. But we recognize that obviously Android is extremely important, and that will follow in Q2 of next year. Okay, next slide. Okay, with that, I think we'll open it up to questions.
Great, thanks very much, Alan. We have a few questions in the queue, and they're talking about multiple elements of this. So the first one asks how IATA will participate in this market. Are we going to partner with others? Are we replacing others? Maybe just how we position ourselves in that market. Do you want to go for that, Alan?
Okay. If you look, we started out, or when I started out with the presentation, our objective is not to be providing the market with IATA contactless travel solution. Our objective is to get passengers flying again. So in order to achieve that, we will work with any other industry players out there. We developed the solution in a modular approach, simply so that we can support airlines and other providers. So yeah, I mean, we're out there to try and get people flying again. If that means working with people, other parties, we definitely will. And again, we're owned by the airlines, so we will take direction from them. And if they tell us that they want to work it this way or that way, that's where we're going to take our lead from. So long as it furthers our objective of getting passengers flying again safely.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We'll take that a bit further. The question also asks, have we published open standards for the requirements?
There are some open standards already which we're adopting, such as the ICAO DTC. The other ones, there are no others. We'll adopt the ICAO DTC and the W3C and the 1ID standards. For the other areas, there are no other standards out there at the moment. So we will be publishing our open interfaces. And again, we're moving at breakneck speed here. We're pushing months and months of work into literally weeks. So as soon as we have those standards available, or as soon as we have those open interfaces, we will be publishing for the entire industry. So they will be on our website as soon as they're available.
Okay. Then we have a couple questions on cost. How much will this cost and who pays?
Okay. Very good question. We're working on that at the moment. Again, as I said a minute ago, we're compressing months of work into a very short period of time. So we don't have the finalized cost yet, but what I can guarantee you is that it'll be absolutely as low cost as possible. As you've seen, we're actually building this solution based on existing solutions. So the really expensive elements of this are thematic and IATA contactless travel, but we've already developed them already for passports and visas. So what we're trying to do is keep the cost as absolutely low as possible for ourselves, and in turn, we will then charge airlines as low a cost as possible. There's two things to note about that. Number one, the fee will be based on a per passenger. So where an airline uses it, they will just pay, again, it'll be a very low fee per passenger. So we're not talking about any major upfront costs for the airline. It'll be something they'll be able to subscribe to it, potentially in a limited way in a pilot basis with extremely low cost. And then over time, as they build up, then they just pay per passenger. So the key points are as low as possible. And number two, no fixed cost. There'll only be a fee per passenger. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Maybe just a further clarification on that. Is there a potential cost to the passenger? And is there a potential cost for governments?
No. Our current model will be based on a very small, again, a very small fee per passenger, which we charge to the airlines. For the governments and the passengers, there won't be any direct fee.
Okay. In terms of time to market, will all 4 modules be to market at the same time, or will some come before, some come later?
For the pilot next month, that's the pilot is quite limited, so it'll be based around the core IATA contactless travel solution. When we go to market in Q1, I expect all 4 modules will be available. We may even phase them in over time. I can imagine that might also be an option. If one module is finished earlier, we might bring that into the solution earlier. But in principle, we're aiming to have everything completed as we displayed for Apple in Q1 next year.
Okay. There have been some other high-profile similar products in the market for several months. How does IATA envisage working with, helping, or competing with them?
Again, I don't think this is a matter of competition. When nobody's flying, nobody's winning. So we don't see that as in terms of competition. If we can work with other vendors if we can work with other providers out there, we will do, so long as it achieves our objective of getting passengers flying again. And again, that's why we have created an open modular approach based on open standards and open interfaces. So we will work with obviously not anybody, but we'll work with anybody who's working in this area. So the other solution providers out there, we'll definitely work with them. And again, if our member airlines, they're the ones who will dictate exactly what we do. So I'm sure that if they look at the other providers and say this is a good solution, we'll definitely work with them.
Okay. Some of the alliances have already started piloting other products. Do you see that as a concern, or are you also working with the alliances?
We have had discussions with all of the alliances, just with most of the major airlines out there at the moment. I would envisage we will probably also do pilots with both the airlines and the alliances. I hope we would. Again, I think there's enough room here for everybody. So different solutions will have different strengths. Again, I can't emphasize enough. I'll go back to the original point. Our objective is to get passengers flying again. So we would encourage airlines to work with whoever they can in order to achieve that goal.
Okay. Another question, have you worked with governments on this, and are you sure that what you're going to put into the market, governments will be willing to accept?
That's an extremely good question. For the digital travel credentials, so the digital version of your passport, we've engaged with a number of different governments on that. And governments can sometimes be a little bit slow to adopt these technologies. But when we've had discussions on the creation of the digital passport, they've been extremely open to it. I've been really amazed how open governments have been, because they see the benefits of this. When it comes to the health, the COVID test results, we haven't engaged with them directly on this yet, but all governments are saying the same thing. They want to be able to verify passengers' travel or test results. It's in nobody's benefit to have fake tests out there. So I'm based on the experience with the DTC. I would be very surprised if governments weren't open to this. And now that I say that, we have spoken to one government, and they've been very open to this. They effectively are thinking along the same lines. So yeah.
Okay. Considering the relationship with governments and the digital passport concept, can the system operate in a dual mode? In other words, you have digital passports and paper passports, or is IATA pushing for a conversion to digital passports?
I don't think it would be feasible to say that we're going to have just electronic passports only for the next couple of years. Maybe I can use a personal anecdote. I live in Amsterdam and I work in Geneva. Since the outbreak of before the outbreak of COVID-19, I never needed to physically hand over my passport. Ever since COVID-19 has come about, I now need to queue up twice and hand over my passport and my boarding pass to somebody who accepts my passport and boarding pass, looks at it, passes it back to me, and then goes to the next person without washing their hands. I mean, that's an absolutely, you couldn't make it up. So since COVID has come about, I'm now being forced to hand over documents. And this is one of the key drivers between the IATA contactless travel app. The idea is by creating an electronic version of your passport, it means that I can walk through the airport and instead of physically handing over my documents, instead of doing that, I instead look at a camera. And because I've shared my digital identity with the airline or the airport beforehand, they already have that details. So I look up a camera, they recognize me, they have my details already, and they allow me to pass. This type of technology will power things like self-boarding gates, access to business lounges, bag drop. So all the physical touch points in the past, these are things which are going to go away with this type of contactless technology. It still means I'll probably have my passport in my pocket somewhere. But the main point is that I'm using my face as my boarding pass and my passport. So yeah, I think they'll run in parallel for a number of different years. But so long as I have the digital version available now, that's the most important thing.
Okay. A question about contactless travel. Are all the processes in the airport ready for contactless travel, or does some work still need to be done with airlines or with airports for conversion? And if so, what are the costs involved?
Okay, that's a really good question. One of the reasons IATA contactless travel is based on One ID, which many of you will have heard of before. What we've seen in the past is that individual airports have their own programs. So if you go to one airport, you'll register on a kiosk in that airport, and then you can have contactless travel in that airport. And then you go to the next airport, and they have their system. And then the next airport, and they have their system. Some of them will be linked to airlines, and some of them won't. But so what you've got across the world is these pockets of initiatives. And what we're trying to do is bring them all together under contactless travel, which means that the passengers can register once using the IATA solution. And once they've done that, once they've registered once, they can then share their digital credentials with all of these different 60 airports around the world. Now, there's two things which come to mind there. Number one, those airports need to have contactless travel environment in place or contactless travel solution in place. So yeah, that's something which is on the airline and the airport side to develop. What we're doing is providing the access to passengers. So that's the first point. The second point is that IATA is not a business to business, or it's not a business to consumer brand. So as part of phase 2, our launch, the second launch, we'll also be we'll also be offering a software development kit. And what that means is that airlines will be able to integrate this technology into their own mobile app. You know, again, I'll give my own personal anecdote. I fly up and down every week between Geneva and Amsterdam. I live on the KLM app, which is the airline I use for that route. I don't want to be doing this type of thing on an IATA app. I want to be doing it on the KLM app. So if you could imagine a situation, hopefully in 6 months' time, I will be using the KLM app. And if I'm going to Hong Kong or Dubai or whichever airports offer this technology, I'll be able to do all of that within with the airline's own app. But it's ultimately up to the airlines and the airports to actually provide that solution. That's not something which IATA is getting involved in. We're purely getting involved with the enrollment and the sharing of the credentials. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. We have two last questions before we move on to the next presentation. So the first of those is asking about the underlying technology platform for the distributed data collection and management. Can you explain a little bit more what that is and what specific technology platform we are using?
We are basing it on blockchain technologies. However, I should be really clear at this point. No passenger data is going on any blockchain. Okay, so the passenger's data goes directly from their phone to the airline or airport or airline or government. It's using decentralized identity technologies. The network we're using it's based on the sovereign network, and the sovereign network is an open platform. So it's not proprietary, belonging to any one company. It's many different companies across the industry have got together. It's based on the Linux Foundation, I believe. So yeah, based on blockchain technologies, but with no storage of passengers' data on the blockchain. and it's based on the sovereign network.
Great, thank you. And we have one last question. Alan, you spoke about this being developed in IATA's Amsterdam operation. I guess maybe that's new for some people that IATA has an office in Amsterdam. Can you explain a little bit about what we do there? Not just this, but also the thematic product, et cetera?
Okay. Actually, I should clarify there, the thematic product, which is the product which collects all the passport and visa and now COVID regulations, and that is based in the Amsterdam office. The other solutions, so contactless travel is based out of Geneva, and then the other two solutions are also based out of Geneva. Within the Amsterdam office, I'd encourage any of you to visit there. It's incredible what they do. Basically, there's a team of people in Amsterdam who work with governments, airlines, and airports, governments and airlines around the world. And what they do is they collect all the passport and visa regulations. And not only do they collect the passport and visa regulations, but they also speak with the airlines and say, how exactly are these being applied? So, for example, many countries will have restrictions on one-way travel or travel on one-way tickets, but not all the governments enforce it for all nationalities. So what we do is we work with both the governments and the airlines to figure out what are the regulations and how are they being applied. What they then do is they take all of that information and they program it into a rules engine. And that's what powers airline check-in systems. So none of you probably realize it, but you probably all use the thematic service multiples of times. So every time you check in for your flight, your passport details and your itinerary details get processed through the system. I should make one small point to this. No, when I say your passport details, your name or passport number, none of that gets exchanged. It's only something like, in my case, an Irish national born on the 29th of July in 1971 with an Irish passport is traveling to London on this particular date. So it's all anonymized information. But it's incredible. 800 million passengers were processed by the system. It's incredible the work the team in Amsterdam do. Okay.
Super. Thanks very much, Alan. It's incredible work that the team in Amsterdam do, particularly as they were rushing to keep track of all of the various COVID restrictions that were coming in place. And obviously this product is going to play, or our experience in that is going to play a very important role in the development of the IATA Travel Pass. So there's a press release going out on that. It's a new announcement, so it's a launch today. So I encourage you all to have a look at that. With that, we'll bring this part of the Global Media Day for today to a conclusion.